So sometimes right now it feels like the left and the right couldn't be farther apart. There's a divide in our country between the two ideologies, and it seems like we're at a place where there's almost no agreement over anything. But one of the areas where we're seeing some agreement, at least in the Senate, is a bipartisan push to take the war powers away from Joe Biden. And this is something I can personally get behind. Now, this follows his airstrikes on Syria, and we're going to talk about all of the ways that this is going on, where this power stems from, and why it's important to maybe put a stop to it here. And we're going to do that in a minute. But first, let me tell you about me. I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer and I'm a legal and political commentator here on YouTube. So if you like legal and political commentary, news, opinion, analysis, all that stuff, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it so you don't miss any episodes. Okay, so where does the president derive the power to actually issue a strike in Syria? Well, the president is commander-in-chief. He's commander-in-chief of the armed forces, which means that when the armed forces are activated, he gets basically unbridled and unchecked control of them. As commander-in-chief, the president has a ton of power. However, it wasn't always designed that way. And the counterbalance to that is in Article 1 of the Constitution, and it says that Congress shall have the sole authority to declare war, and they shall also have sole control over the budget for the military. This was supposed to be a check on executive power, because remember, they're coming from a land of kings, and those kings had full authority over any sort of military that existed. They had full authority over the funding of it, and they also had full authority over the declarations of war as the head of state. We took that power away from the chief executive. We took that power and put it in the hands of the legislature, and we said that that was an effective counterbalance to it. The problem is, we got really, really lazy on enforcing that sometime after the Korean War, and we really haven't declared war officially in pretty much any major conflict since the Korean War. In fact, the Vietnam War was entirely a police action, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan weren't really a full declaration of war. Instead, they passed something called the Authorized Use of Military Force, and that authorized use of military force basically gave the president the authority to utilize the armed forces to go after enemies of the United States in connection to the attacks on the World Trade Center. And that was expanded a little bit later by a subsequent authorized use of military force. And we've just been renewing those things for now almost 2 decades. And it's getting a little stale. And the sort of authorization that was given seems to be overstepped by recent presidents. I mean, Trump fired missiles at Syria as well. Obama used the authorized military force to drone strike American citizens in the Middle East. This thing has been blown way over the original intent of Congress. And so now people are saying, maybe we need to rein that in. And they're mad about these airstrikes that Biden has done. Not barely a month into his presidency, he went ahead and fired missiles at the Middle East. And that has people kind of wondering where we're going here. So they're now coming together talking about stripping this. Let's read a little bit from this article. This article's from Politico, but it'll be linked in the description so you can check it out. There's some good info in here if you want, but we're going to hit the main points. Senators Tim Kaine and Todd Young on Wednesday introduced bipartisan legislation that would repeal decades-old authorizations for the use of military force in the Middle East amid escalating tensions between the U.S. and Iran in the region. And of course, this is the big problem. With Iran coming up to being a nuclear power, we've got to navigate this carefully. Now, Trump had navigated it fairly well. Tensions seem to be de-escalating. Now that Biden is back in office, things don't seem to be going as rosy, and we've now got strikes on Iran-backed targets, and that is part of the problem. But Tim Kaine and Young unveiled the measure as lawmakers have expressed frustration with President Joe Biden's decision to launch airstrikes in Syria last week without first seeking congressional approval. comes just hours after an Iraqi military base housing U.S. troops and civilian contractors was hit by rockets. The bill would repeal the 1991 and 2002 authorizations that cleared the way for a prolonged military conflict in Iraq, culminating in calls from Democrats and Republicans alike to end the so-called forever wars in the region. Quote, last week's airstrikes in Syria show that the executive branch, regardless of party, will continue to stretch its war powers. It's funny that he says regardless of party because Obama was one of the biggest users of the authorized use of military force and one of the biggest proponents of it. He did a ton of bombing, of drone attacks and other things in the Middle East. But, you know, as things get further and further away from events, that sort of excuse starts to run hollow. And Biden is supposed to be something different, though he's not. I mean, let's be clear. It's still Joe Biden. He's supposed to be something different. He's supposed to be changing things up. I don't know why people think this, because Biden specifically told people we're going back. Like, that was his entire slogan for the campaign, was we're going back to what we were. But I'm not sure why anyone, especially in Congress, is surprised by this, but that's where it goes. He goes on to say Congress has a responsibility to not only vote to authorize new military action, but to repeal old authorizations that are no longer necessary. It says Congress has largely abdicated its constitutional authority to declare war, and presidents from both parties have used outdated authorizations to legally justify U.S. military action, including, and perhaps most notably, the 2001 authorization for the use of military force against al-Qaeda and the Taliban, which was approved in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. So, as you can see, I mean, these things have been used for almost 20 years now. It'll be 20 years this September to justify all of these actions. And a lot of the action is not related in any way to September 11th. They just went ahead and said, well, these people are like those people, therefore we have authorization. And Congress isn't really happy with the fact that their authority to decide these things and to hold this power is being taken and used in ways that they don't like. Now, this is Congress's fault. Make no mistake. Congress has renewed these acts several times, and they've had the opportunity to repeal them several times, and they just haven't done so. But now they're thinking maybe it's time. Quote, Congress has been operating on autopilot when it comes to our essential duties to authorize the use of military force. The fact that authorities for both of these wars are still law today is illustrative of the bipartisan failure of Congress to perform its constitutionally mandated oversight role. Senators from across the ideological spectrum signed on to the Kane-Young bill as co-sponsors on Wednesday, including Senators Tammy Duckworth, Mike Lee, Chris Coons, and Chuck Grassley. So this thing has pretty broad bipartisan support in the Senate. We'll see what the House does with people like Nancy Pelosi running the show in the House. I'm not quite sure we're going to get too much action there, but it is something that needs to start happening. We need to roll this back. If Congress wants to declare a new war, authorize new military force against these new targets that are so attenuated from the attacks on the World Trade Center, then they can go ahead and do that. If that's what the American people want, if that's what Congress wants, and if that's what the president wants to do, let's get everybody in unison here. I personally am tired of seeing us constantly at war. I'm tired of seeing our military, our young men and women, being overseas. I fear for what happens to my kids when they get to that age. I'm tired of seeing this military presence and, more importantly, military attack all across the globe. Let's get our people home. Let's get them working here, and let's start defending America. Let's start building up us before we worry about everybody else. That's my thoughts on it. I don't know. What do you guys think? Drop a comment below. Tell me, should Joe Biden have the keys, or is it time to take away the keys? I don't know. Let me know. We'll talk soon. Peace. Peace.